You're leaving?
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hal Shurtleff, and I am the New England coordinator for the John Birch Society. I welcome you to our business and professional meeting of March 2014. Before I introduce Jack Kenny, our speaker, we'll talk about the dictatorship of the rats and snakes, dealing with the EPA. I want to mention a couple of things here. First off, our good friend Sam Blumenfeld has his book, How to Tutor, which has been republished by this Chalcedon Foundation, and it's available through them, probably on Amazon too. And the 3 R's, this came out in the 70s, Sam?
Originally, yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the early books that was, it was designed for parents to supplement and then eventually homeschool the children. And Sam said that this should be a companion next to the Bible. So please, it's a great book. And we just came out with a book by our CEO, Arthur Thompson, on the free trade issue. And we've got a couple of pending issues, the Transatlantic Partnership and the Transatlantic Partnerships. And when the word partnership was put in there, you know we're going to be on the low end of any partnership dealing with Europe or the Orient. And so international merger for by foreign entanglement. So please, I have these available. Without further ado, Jack Kenny is a contributing editor or writer for the New American Magazine. He's also used to write for a regular column for the Union Leader, and because of his opposition to the Gulf War back and what have you, his principal opposition, the neocons that run the paper, didn't quite like that. So, but he does freelance writing, and he writes regularly for the New American Magazine. And every time he's got a good article, we want to have him speak about it. So he wrote one recently about the EPA, and this topic is called The Dictatorship of the Rats and Snakes. So let's give him a nice warm hand.
Yeah, no, the article that Hal referred to is still forthcoming, still yet to be written. But I thought I'd do it in reverse this time. And last time I came here, I'd written an article about killing by government. You know, the government takes the guns away, and then, you know, only outlaws have guns, and the outlaws are in the government. But all you people know more about guns than I do anyway. So I thought that was probably not a good choice. But anyway, for those of you who were here when I was here last, I hope you're not too disappointed that I did make it again. And this time I got here in time for the food, which I hope will nourish my brain. And I got here, the directions I had were almost good. I got them, I called the club here, and I think he forgot to tell me about that last red light. Now last time, I want to apologize to our distinguished president, because last time I was here, I said, I offered a late, I thought I ought to have some excuse, however lame, for my vast tardiness. And so I said, well, I got directions from the president. And I thought everybody knew I was joking, but Jack took me. I got an email from him, said the directions were not that bad. But you know, I thought people would recognize it as a joke, because the first time I spoke to this group, I got a laugh by saying that I did not dare tell my editor or publisher at the Union Leader that I was taking directions from the president of the John Birch Society. if I had, they would have terminated my column a lot sooner than they did. Mr. Loeb probably would have been sympathetic to the John Birch, probably was, I'm not sure, maybe Jack knows. But, you know, the crew they have running things there now, I mean, it's just, and by the way, they had another editor who succeeded Jim Finnegan, and Jack may remember he had a very nice visit with him, but ever since then, I mean, it's been downhill for as far as their recognition of the John Birch Society. But I mean, that's okay, because you're doing good work without their help, and occasionally they get things right, and we could be on the same page with them, but as I used to be. But they're, I don't know. My topic is not the John Birch Society. By the way, coming from New Hampshire, I want to assure you that on the way down along I-93 and east on 62 and so forth, I was looking for, but I didn't see any red lines to cross. So I apparently did not cross any of President Obama's red lines, because I don't want any sanctions against any of my assets, which includes which begins and ends with a 1988 Volvo. But, we in northern New England don't need any help from the federal government to freeze our assets, especially in the winter. And finally, I want to say, as a tribute to Mr. President, that he has been president of the John Birch Society for as long as I've known him, and that's like about 22 years. And I don't know how long, except that I understand that he first won the job by campaigning in all 13 states. And in a couple of Indian nations, where old copies of Jack's old scalp John Marshall posters still hang on some TV walls. And finally, last, before I get into the critters, the ESA, the Endangered Species, I would like to say I bring you greetings from the governor of New Hampshire, but I haven't spoken to the governor of New Hampshire since sometime before she became governor, which is a little over a year now. And I wouldn't want to embarrass her. I'd let her embarrass herself with her budgets. But His Excellency Maggie Hassan might send you greetings if she knew you were here. But and by the way, I'm not being a chauvinist when I say His Excellency Maggie Hassan. I'm following the Constitution of New Hampshire that says the governor's title shall be His Excellency. And interestingly enough, sometime back when Jean Shaheen was governor, some of her partisans got on the ballot a proposed constitutional amendment to change it from, to his or her or whatever. And the people rejected it, even while they were re-electing Jean Shaheen. So I thought that was kind of neat. And Maggie, I don't know if any of you ladies go by the name of Maggie, but Margaret Hassan insists on being called Maggie. When you introduce her at a forum, she's in a speaking engagement, they introduce her as Governor Maggie Hassan. And all I could think of when I was in boot camp, when we were out on the firing range, and we were firing at a target anywhere from 200 to 500 yards away. If you, Jack probably never missed, so he doesn't remember. If you missed the target completely, they waved a red flag, and they called it Maggie's Drawers. Now, if I wanted to embarrass the governor, I would say that I haven't seen Maggie's Drawers since boot camp. They're on display at Paris Island. But as I say, I'd rather let her embarrass herself. By the way, I also want to apologize to Sam Blumenfeld and to all of you because of my last appearance here. When I came here so late, because I goofed up on the directions, I got here so late that Sam was ready to fill in for me. And Hal turned to me and said, "Well, are you ready to go now?" And I should have said, "No, let Sam give his talk, and I'll work on mine for some other time." But no, so I robbed you of hearing a good talk by Sam. And I want to say one thing: if a teacher or a speaker says one thing that you remember years later, I think that's an accomplishment. And I heard Sam talk in Nashua, New Hampshire several years ago. And Sam said, look, they're all raving about the greatest generation, all right? He said, why don't we educate people the way they educated the greatest generation? And how do they do that? Well, they didn't have the kids sitting in circles on the floor, tossing notes to each other or whatever. No, the desks were bolted down. The teachers, with some authority, stood in front of the class and taught. And we seem to have lost that now. And I don't want to get into your subject, Sam, Common Core and all that nonsense. But it's really, so I remembered that. And I thought that makes sense. President Obama probably can't understand how the greatest generation survived the Depression and won World War II without, national health care, without Head Start, without universal kindergarten, preschool, universal preschool. I mean, how did they do it? It's like the
Pell Grants, too.
the what?
Pell Grants, you don't want to forget those.
That's right. And you know, it's like that wonderful pamphlet that Leonard Read wrote, I Pencil, the autobiography of a pencil. And how the pencil came into being without a department of pencils at the UN or Washington. I mean, it's just amazing. Say, yeah, they get the wood from here, the rubber from there, the lead from someplace else, and they put it all together. And it's it's a great example in microcosm of Adam Smith's theory of the invisible hand. I mean, it's just marvelous. And you know, the reason I'm rambling a bit, because I think this topic of endangered species is a topic that touches on so many other topics. And you know, I decided to spare myself a lot of research and to spare you a lot of boredom, you know, by digging into it, telling you the story of, you know, this project and that project that got held up by these various critters, which I'll do in brief, but very briefly. But you know, the thing is, I don't think it really is about endangered species. Just as, you know, climate change isn't about climate change. It's about, I don't have to, again, you know more of this than I do, but it's about this new world order concept and you know, it's about indoctrinating the kids. It's about preventing economic development is what it's about, because, you know, I dealt with these people, not as an adversary, but as a reporter in the late 1970s when Seabrook in New Hampshire was a hot issue, the Seabrook nuclear plant. And you know, what it came down to was that if the public service company who was building Seabrook at the time, if they had proposed putting solar panels on everybody's roof and you know, going to solar energy completely, these people would have been out picketing against the sun. Because their idea, the basic idea was if some company is going to make a profit out of it, it's got to be evil, right? So, going back to when, do you remember the snail darter? Okay? The Thistalk Dam project in Tennessee, Howard Baker's baby, right? They wanted to get that through, and that was going to create, I don't know how much electricity, maybe a new TVA or something. But the opponents said, whoa, guess what? We've got this Endangered Species Act. So they went and found the snail darter. I mean, they almost recruited the snail darter to be their test, their constitutional test. So they sued the people that were going to build the Thistalk Dam, and they got to stop. Now, there were economic arguments, pro and con, behind the Thistalk, which, you know, I'm not going to go into because I don't remember them, and it's kind of not germane to the subject. But the thing was, the opponents could have fought it out by honestly opposing it on the economic and environmental grounds, instead of bringing in this snail darter and saying we can't disturb this critter, and you know, holding up and killing the project. So the snail darter was one. There was something called the elderberry longhorn beetle, and they couldn't reinforce. I don't know if this had anything to do with Katrina, when the dams burst, but they couldn't. The Army Corps of Engineers were not allowed to reinforce dams because it would disturb the habitat of the elderberry longhorn beetle. Now, if the dams burst, and I don't know if some of them did or not, it would drown people, but they had to, you know, preserve the habitat of the elderberry longhorn beetle. Then there was there was a giant telescope that they wanted to put on a mountain somewhere in Arizona, and they couldn't do that because that would disturb the habitat of the red-tailed squirrel. And I think the man who was the head of the Department of the Interior at the time said, don't we have enough gray-tailed squirrels? I mean, do they all have to have red tails? But you know, so they couldn't. The other one, and this is one of my favorites. They were going to build a hospital out in the, I think again it was Arizona. It was somewhere in the desert. But the hospital, which was going to be, you know, as most hospitals are, several stories high, would have intersected the flight path of the Delhi Sands flower-loving fly. So, you know, people would have been healed at that hospital, but the Delhi Sands flower-loving fly had to be left undisturbed and on his flight path. So, you know, so they had that thing. I was just reading about one today. Freshwater shrimp. They had to protect the freshwater shrimp. Now, the problem was that they determined these things could grow in mud puddles. And they designated an area,
Yeah.
1.7 million acres, over 38 counties in 2 states, where you couldn't disturb the mud puddles. Now, can you imagine how many mud puddles there were in 1.7 million, you know, miles? Excuse me, acres. Or maybe it was miles. I'll have to go back and read it. But anyway, over 38 counties in 2 states. And you know, one of the congressmen, said, wait a minute. If there are that many mud puddles, if there are that many of them, how are they an endangered species? Because, you know, what they do is, the criterion for whether the thing is endangered or not is, you know, how few of them there are. And so sometimes you'll hear about, well, you know, something about, I remember I was listening to Wyoming Public Radio once, and, on, you know, with the internet. And, thank you, Al Gore.
Yeah.
And they said the Preble Meadows jumping mouse had been taken off the endangered species list. And the environmentalists were upset about it. They said, no, he's still in danger. You got to protect this little critter. And so, you know, so that battle went on. But, you know, if they determined there were too few of these critters, then they said, okay, we've saved enough of them now, they're no longer in danger of extinction. Who goes out and counts these things? I think it's a big enough job for the federal government to take the census of the people. But to go out and count, I mean, did they count the shrimp in the mud puddles in the over 1.7 million acres or whatever? I mean, this is crazy. But you know, it goes on and on. And then there was the famous kangaroo rat. I mean, remember the first time I heard that a farmer was descended upon by the Fish and Wildlife people for plowing his land because he was disturbing the habitat of the kangaroo rat. And I said, a kangaroo rat? I mean, what? And you know, I looked into the Constitution, tried to find the protection for the kangaroo rat. Yeah, I find protection for persons. I find protection for, you know, no person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. But here comes this Fish and Wildlife team descending on this farmer. And you know, the interesting thing now is that Fish and Wildlife and so many other federal agencies have SWAT teams now. So I mean, they can come at you with, well, and you know, the same thing, not just endangered species, but we've read about it too with people who produce raw milk and sell raw milk. Yeah. Oh, they come down on them, you know, with the SWAT teams and everything. And you know, Ron Paul sounded radical when I first heard him say that, you know, we've got 100,000 or more federal agents armed, and you know, too many people unarmed. We need to, you know, turn that around. And I thought, okay, but then you may remember John Roberts when he was a nominee for the Supreme Court and became the Chief Justice of New Hampshire. Somebody recalled, he was on the D.C. Circuit Court, appointed by President Bush, and somebody recalled that he made a comment about the Arroyo Southwestern something or other, one of these critters, toad, Arroyo Southwestern toad. And he wanted the court to reconsider the protection that it had granted this Arroyo Southwestern toad, which was in California, down around San Diego. And Roberts said the Arroyo toad, for reasons of its own, chooses to remain in California. And is not likely engaged in commerce. So the fact that you can cite the Interstate Commerce Clause as your authority for going in to protect this, the Arroyo southwestern toad, is not valid. But the court refused to reconsider. But that endeared me to Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, until that Supreme Court decision in June of 2012 upholding the individual mandate on Obamacare. And I thought, the idea occurred to me today, and I wish I'd thought of it sooner. The idea occurred to me today, we all should have sent towels to Chief Justice Roberts to make up for the one he threw in, the towel he threw in on the Obamacare decision. But I think that's significant because the Interstate Commerce Clause, Joe Sobran once said that, imagine what Stalin could have done with the Interstate Commerce Clause, because they've interpreted the Interstate Commerce Clause to be, wider than, it's basically the eighth wonder of the world. It's wider than the Grand Canyon and the Gobi Desert combined, if you believe them. So, the Congress does just about anything under the Interstate Commerce Clause. Occasionally, it gets reined in. United States versus Lopez, 1995. The Supreme Court had a law that was being challenged, a federal law duly passed by Congress and signed by the President that established a gun-free zone around schools. And Lopez was arrested for carrying a gun within that area, near a school. So the justices looked at it, and I think it was a 5-4 decision, and the brilliant man from New Hampshire, Souter, was on the wrong side, as usual. But Rehnquist was on the right side, and Scalia and others. They said, look, the law cites the Interstate Commerce Clause, but it doesn't fit, because carrying a gun in the vicinity of the school isn't interstate. The school wasn't on the state border. And it's not commerce. Well, nobody was selling or buying anything, okay? So they said 5-4. They said this law is void. Incidentally, the states, many of the states at the time already had gun-free zones around the school. The Supreme Court did not stop them, stop the states from them, them states' rights. But, so what happened was the critics of the conservative wing of the Supreme Court said, well, that's judicial activism on the right. And, all they did was, they said, look, interstate commerce. It's not interstate and it's not commerce. Therefore, ipso fatso, as Archie Bunker used to say, it's not interstate commerce. So, but, what got me going lately on this thing about the Endangered Species Act, Klamath Falls, whatever it is, up in northern California. Yeah. I listened to Carly Fiorina, who I think should be on the Republican ticket next in 2016. By the way, she is a proud pro-life woman. And she was talking about what happened up in California. She was from California. She ran against Barbara Boxer, I think it was 2 years ago, and lost, which says something about the intelligence of the California voter. But she said, the population of California has doubled in 40 years. In 40 years, they've not built one new waterway or reservoir or whatever. And what they've done, the federal government has diverted the water to save the smelt, which I think is a brand of salmon. Correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, to save the fish. The farmers, you've probably seen in the paper or on TV the pictures of the parched land, the parched farmland, because they can't get any water because it's being saved for these blasted fish, okay? Now, where do they get the authority for that? Where in the Constitution does it says fish rights trump human rights, trump farmers' rights? Farmers are persons, they have right to life, liberty, and property. And if they don't have a right to this water, because I don't know, where the ownership lies, but they deserve some consideration from their federal government. Because, you eliminate some farmlands and we all end up paying higher prices for food, or people overseas do, where people are starving. So, I mean, this makes no sense at all. So, and then, the ultimate insult. President Obama went out there with some relief. I'm going to give you some federal money to help you out here, folks. And he blamed the drought on climate change. Climate change. So, I mean, it is so exasperating. And I think what troubles me also about this is that I have yet to hear this issue come up in a presidential campaign. Whether, you got the candidates there, either for primary or general election. Nobody said, hey, what are you going to do to rein in the Endangered Species Act? Now, they started this thing in 1973. Granted, there were a few preliminary laws, 28 and so forth. But the idea basically was to save things like, the bald eagle and a few, really precious, if you will, animals that we wanted to keep from going extinct. But then, before long, there were 2,000 different species on the Endangered Species Act. And the United Nations had 30,000. Now, I don't know if any of these critters post on Facebook, but Facebook recently, you may have heard, Facebook recently came out with 50 different gender classifications for people. The Bible, which I still believe only has two. But 50 different gender, 50 different gender classifications times 30,000 species, you do the math. But so, I mean, I think that people, I think this would be a good project for the John Birch Society, repeal or at least roll back, no, not the genders, no, but repeal or roll back the Endangered Species Act. This is a blatant, it's blatantly unconstitutional, and yet it goes on, and we seem helpless to do anything about it. I don't know how many people. By the way, Senator Rand Paul, my preseason favorite for president in 2016, which means he probably won't get there, wrote a book called Government Bullies, and he documented a lot of this stuff about, moving in on people, because they covered up a mud puddle or a swamp or something. And, the government can do this all the time. I mean, they can, because if they want to cover up a swamp or something, they'll say, well, we'll create another one somewhere else. But, you've got to get all kinds of permits and everything. By the way, when I was driving down here on Interstate 93, looking for those red lines, I thought about the interstate highway system. It's still one of the major accomplishments of the United States, and one of the major accomplishments of the Eisenhower administration. And of course, they got it done. It was to facilitate a lot of things, including commerce. But the idea was, the legal argument for it was that it was for defense, for national defense. You could move troops, you could move missiles and everything faster. In fact, somebody told me, I didn't realize this, somebody told me the bridges had to be at a certain height so the missiles could get under them. But, and then somebody asked me, why is Hawaii in the interstate highway system? And I thought about it, and he kept asking me this, so finally I put it in my column. I said, why is Hawaii in the interstate highway system? I said, even Senator Kennedy can't drive a car underwater that far. But could we have built the interstate highway system today with all these challenges to save this species and that species, and I don't think it would ever get done. And if it could get done, it would be done at a much, much higher cost, than would otherwise be the case. So I think I'll throw it open now. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts about this, if you've given any thoughts about it before, or if you have any questions. I'm no expert on this, but I think you see where I'm coming from and why. So, Hal, you want me to take questions, or?
Yeah, okay.
Anybody have any questions,
Now we can wrap it
comments?
up, and then informally you can ask questions.
Yeah.
wonder, or I'm annoyed by the fact that the regulations are so flexible that the wind power machines,
Oh, yeah.
that kill dozens and dozens, hundreds
Yeah.
of birds of prey, and that doesn't seem to matter.
No, and you know,
Endangered birds.
yeah, well, it was ironic too. Did you notice the irony a few years ago, during the last couple of years of Senator Kennedy's life? You know, this guy who's always on the side of the environmentalists, they put windmills out, you know, somewhere they could see off in the distance from his home on the Cape or wherever. And oh, he didn't want that so unsightly, you know. But yeah, as far as killing the birds, I mean, and you mentioned birds of prey, and this is another thing about the Endangered Species Act. People think it's wonderful they reintroduce the wolves to the national forest. Well, and then you read about some hiker in the national park that's eaten up by a wolf or a coyote or whatever. And I guess you can't shoot a coyote that's attacking your livestock because they're protected. But
You can't shoot a squirrel either.
up in here, especially if it's got a red tail, up in Lancaster, New Hampshire. Right, there's a park right kind of in the center of downtown, and right out in front of that park there's a statue of a wolf, and the plaque under the statue talks about how the early settlers battled these wolves and got rid of the critters, and so but today we have a much different, or not we, but I mean the government takes a much different view. Oh no, it's part of nature. Nature's wonderful. Nature's one of your biggest killers. I mean, but no, you should.
Killing off the cattle. The wolves are killing off the cattle up in those areas.
Yeah.
And the farmers can't do anything about it.
What about St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland? He wouldn't be able to do that today, would he?
No. That's what I said. What they call this, the dictatorship of the snakes and so forth. Yeah.
You can't shoot a wolf, but you can shoot a coyote, just to clarify.
Oh, you can't shoot a wolf? Okay.
No, you can't shoot
Oh,
a
you
wolf.
cannot, but you can
Well,
shoot.
in certain areas,
Okay,
unless it's
yeah.
actually, and depending upon which state you live in, depends on whether or not you can shoot it. But my actual point is, extinction is a part of evolution. Therefore, the government ought to give it up.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, one of the things I was thinking about when I was preparing my thoughts for this talk, the federal government owns an awful lot of land in the United States. They own about, I think it's about 85% of Nevada. And I heard Art Thompson give a talk where he said Nevada technically is not really a state. I didn't catch all of that, so I don't know why. But okay, so 85% of Nevada. Roughly 50% of California, 50.1% of Oregon, about 2/3 of Alaska. Now, there was a woman out in California who said, "Look, the federal government owns 50% of the dirt in California. If the critters can't live on half the land, I figure God's calling them home." Yes, sir.
The Federal Reserve System came into effect in 1913, and this country was in the black at that time. And now that you got they have been on the ball, and they have gotten the Federal Reserve System so that is paying them those every time they make a buck. But why would we, how could we get rid of the Federal Reserve System and create the
Sound money system.
detail of it?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you could hear him, the gentleman raised the point about the Federal Reserve and how that's ruining our solvency and our economy and so forth. And I'm glad you brought that up because I was talking to somebody I met at a lunch in Concord, New Hampshire last week, and I found out he went to Harvard, spent 4 years in Harvard. And I said, did you study economics? He said, economics was my major. I said, oh, that means you understand the Federal Reserve. He said, no way. No way. So, and what's happening, this, I'm getting a little bit off subject now, but what's happening, that's affecting those farmers on those parched lands and you and me and everybody else. First of all, you have we're getting undercut from the bottom by the illegal aliens coming in. They're forcing down the price of labor, okay? Then, from the top, our laws encourage companies to move overseas. So, there are more people chasing fewer jobs. And then on top of all that, when Uncle Ben or Aunt Janet yelling at the Fed turns on the spigot and turns more dollars loose, those dollars don't come to each citizen, proportionally. They go to the banks loan them to the big bucks, borrowers, and they get to spend it before the prices shoot up. But that's what's crushing the middle class in America. And by the way, the Endangered Species Act, I'm getting back on target now, was signed December 28th, 1973 by guess which president? Anybody want to guess?
Nixon.
Richard M. Nixon, right, who also gave us the EPA. And we can't trust these people, Democrats or Republicans. They go in there and they say they're for smaller government, but then they give us more and bigger government. But no, and the middle class, I think, is being crushed. It has been since about that time, about the early to mid 70s. So, and although I know the Federal Reserve goes back to 1913, but anyway, I guess I'm done for today.
All right, okay, thank you. We take questions off the podium just to wrap things up. Thank you, Jack.